Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, as always, is to shortcut you straight to being well-informed. We take the most complex, dense documents on the planet and turn them into a clear, structured, and hopefully fascinating map for you to follow.
Today, we are wading deep into the often overwhelming world of residential condominium agreements. This is a topic that's notoriously high stakes and really, really detail-oriented.
It really is.
Our sources today are formal, educational, and legal content, and they focus specifically on the intricacies of the agreement of purchase and sale for three very distinct types of condos.
And what are those three?
We're looking at brand new pre-construction, existing standard resale, and the much trickier common elements condominium.
That's right. And when you look at these documents, especially for something as huge as a home, the risk of missing one critical detail is just immense.
It is.
So our mission is to distill all these legal complexities, to give you the key concepts with, concrete examples drawn straight from our sources, and to make sure that by the end of this, you feel genuinely confident navigating the critical differences. Because, as we're about to find out, condos are absolutely not a one-size-fits-all legal concept.
Not at all. And before we can even jump into the agreements, we have to establish the fundamental legal definitions. The structure of the condo really determines which forms we use.
Okay, so let's start there. The most common type.
Right. So when we talk about a standard condominium, we're referring to the most common type of freehold condo, where you, the owner, have ownership of a specified unit, plus an inseparable interest in what are called the common elements.
So if you live in a high-rise, that's your unit, plus your unavoidable legally tied interest in the lobby, the hallways, the elevators.
The gym, the roof.
The gym you never use.
Exactly. That interest is legally inseparable from your unit. And importantly, maintenance costs for all those common areas are shared, and your proportion is usually calculated based on the square footage of your unit relative to the whole building.
And you can't opt out.
You can opt out,
Yeah.
even if you never set foot in that gym.
Okay, that structure seems pretty straightforward. But then we have this other thing, the Common Elements Condominium, or CEC. That one sounds like it has a bit of a dual identity, almost blurring the line between a house and a condo.
It absolutely does, and this is where a lot of buyers get confused. A CEC has two legally separate portions that are paradoxically inseparable when you go to buy or sell.
Okay, break that down, Terry.
First, you have the freehold ownership of a property itself. This is called the parcel of tied land, or POTL, which is typically a house and the land it sits on. You own that outright.
So I own my house, my front yard, my roof. That's my TOTL.
Correct. But then you have a separate and distinct shared interest in specific common elements. The key is that this shared interest is legally attached to your freehold POTL.
Making the sale of one impossible without the other.
Precisely. You can't sell your house and keep your share of the community pool.
So in a CEC, the common elements aren't like the hallways inside your specific building. They're the amenities or infrastructure for the whole community, which you co-own with all your neighbors.
That's it exactly. They're external infrastructure. Common elements in a CEC are things like private access roads, maybe a gatehouse, a community center, a shared pool complex. Or in some of these luxury developments, it could even be a golf course or private trails.
Wow. Okay, so the legal agreement has to be really clear about that dual ownership structure.
It's crucial for due diligence later on. It has Yeah. to be crystal clear.
Now that we have the fundamentals down, let's unpack the high-stakes world of buying brand new pre-construction condominiums. Despite all the risks and the long timelines, why is this route still so appealing to buyers?
The appeal is powerful, and a lot of it is financial. Buyers are often motivated by a potentially lower initial purchase cost compared to walking into a property that's already built and move-in ready.
They're trying to get in on the ground floor, literally.
Literally. They're capitalizing on prices that they hope will rise significantly by the time the building is actually complete.
But beyond that potential financial upside, there's a huge emotional element, right? The personalization.
Absolutely. The ability to customize your finishes is a massive draw. You get to choose the flooring, the style of the cabinetry, the countertop material, the paint colors. You also get your pick of the layout and the location within the new building, which is really appealing.
And I guess you're also covered by a new home warranty.
Exactly, which provides a layer of security against future defects that you don't get with an older resale property.
Okay, let's talk documents. When you buy a resale condo, you use a standardized form. But when you're dealing with a builder selling a pre-construction unit, that document is a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
Yes, and this is where an uninformed buyer is at maximum risk. Builder agreements are non-standardized. I really can't overstate this.
So every builder writes their own rules.
Every builder. They vary significantly, not just from one development company to another, but often from project to project by the very same developer. They are complex, typically running 10, 20 pages long, and they are prepared specifically by the builder's lawyer to favor the builder's interests in, well, in virtually every transaction.
So these documents are dense, and they're inherently skewed towards the seller, the builder. What kind of, future-defining details are they spelling out that make them so complex and so risky?
I mean, they defined everything that will exist, even though it hasn't been built yet. We're talking about really specific technical details, unit dimensions, the actual materials that will be used for the cupboards and countertops, detailed descriptions of future amenities, specific deposit schedule.
That you have to pay each installment.
Exactly. And crucially, the anticipated occupancy dates. The document is essentially a promise to deliver a future product, not a transfer of something that already exists.
Given that the contract is written by the party you're buying from, buyer protection mechanisms are absolutely critical here. The most famous one is the 10-day cooling off period. I hear this term all the time, but can you break down exactly how that countdown starts? Because the clock only begins ticking once 3 specific documents have been received.
This period is granted by the Condominium Act, and it's a non-negotiable right. It's designed to protect you, the consumer, from signing an immediate binding agreement you haven't had a chance to properly review.
And the countdown starts when?
The 10-day period begins on the later of 3 specific dates. First, the day you receive a copy of the fully signed accepted agreement of purchase and sale.
Okay.
Second, the day you receive the required disclosure statement, and we'll get into that monster of the document shortly. And third, the day you receive the mandatory condo buyer's guide.
Wait, let me just press on that. So if a buyer signs the agreement on a Monday, but the builder's lawyer doesn't finalize the disclosure statement until Friday, that 10-day clock only starts ticking on Friday, not Monday. Is that right?
Precisely. It begins on the latest date among those 3. And this is critical because the disclosure statement can contain hundreds of pages of information, the budget, the rules, the condo's legal structure, and that 10-day window is specifically there to allow you and your lawyer enough time to actually review that massive package.
That is a very tight timeline for due diligence. And the buyer salesperson has a huge role during those 10 days. What must they be advising their client to do during that high-pressure window?
Their core duty is really to ensure comprehension. They have to clearly explain all the clauses and conditions in the agreement. They should advise the buyer on options they have to try and amend or delete or add clauses.
Though I imagine the builder doesn't love that.
No, the builder often pushes back heavily on changes. But most crucially, they must strongly recommend that the buyer get a review of the entire agreement and all the disclosure documents by a real estate lawyer who is specifically experienced in new condominiums. Given how much these documents favor the builder, legal review is not optional, it's essential.
And what if the buyer wants modifications? Let's say they want the right to assign the unit to another buyer before closing, or they want a change to the deposit schedule, or even a minor structural change, like moving a wall for an open concept design.
Any request to modify any part of that builder's agreement has to be made in writing, ideally as an amendment to the agreement itself before that 10-day period is up.
And something like assignment rights, that's a big one.
A huge one. Many builders restrict assignment rights. That's selling your contract before you get title. So if that's a goal for you, you have to negotiate that specific right up front in writing, or it will likely be impossible to do later on.
Let's transition to the money side of pre-construction. I know the deposits are typically much larger than for a resale property. We're often talking 15%, 20% of the price, paid in stages. Why is that heavy upfront commitment necessary?
It's purely a sign of commitment for the builder and a risk mitigation strategy. Since a condo development has very little value to the builder until it's actually finished, registered, and sold, requiring a larger deposit acts as reassurance that the buyer is serious. It minimizes the builder's financial risk before that long construction process is done.
So if a buyer walks away later, the builder has significant funds already held to, mitigate their loss.
That's the idea.
And how is that large deposit protected? We're talking about multi-year timelines where a builder's financial situation could change.
The deposit protection is tiered, which is important to understand. Under the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan, protection is available up to a maximum of $20,000.
Okay, just 20,000.
Right, but any deposits exceeding that $20,000 limit are protected separately under the Condominium Act itself.
So if I put down $100,000, $20,000 is covered by the warranty plan, and the other $80,000 is protected by the Act's rules about holding funds in trust.
Exactly. And on top of that, as of January 2018, that protection was expanded to include any payments you might have made for upgrades or extras.
So if you pay $10,000 up front for premium flooring or better appliances,
That money is also protected under the same structure.
where does all this cash actually go in the meantime? The builder can't just pocket it while construction is ongoing, right?
No, absolutely not. All monies must be made payable to and held by the escrow agent, who is usually the builder's lawyer. These funds are legally required to be held in trust according to a formal document called a Deposit Trust Agreement, or DTA.
So it's kept separate.
It's kept separate and safe. The escrow agent has a strict obligation to get all those deposits within 15 business days of the builder receiving them. This ensures the money is safe, it earns interest for the buyer, and it can't be used by the builder until title officially transfers.
Okay, part 2 is all about transparency, or at least the mandated attempt at it. Once the agreement is signed, the builder has this massive, non-negotiable obligation to provide the buyer with a disclosure statement. What is the overall mandate here, and why is this document so critical?
The builder is required by the Condominium Act to provide this statement shortly after the agreement is signed. In this document, it details the entire future condominium project. It is the builder's legal obligation to give you, the buyer, all the necessary information to truly understand what you're committing to.
It essentially makes the future building real on paper, even if it's still just a hole in the ground.
That's a great way to put it.
Since this document is so fundamental, let's break down its key components clearly, starting with the declaration.
The declaration is the legal backbone of the entire condominium corporation. It defines the street and mailing address, the specific boundaries of each unit, the formula for calculating the common expense amount each unit will pay, and the exact type of condominium, whether it's standard freehold, leasehold, or phased.
And it also identifies those exclusive use common elements you mentioned.
Right. And that's really important.
Give me a concrete example of an exclusive use element and why that declaration is so important.
Okay. A balcony, a terrace, or a specific parking spot in a standard condo are often exclusive use common elements. The declaration specifies that while the structure is technically owned by the corporation, it's a common element, only you, the unit owner, can use it.
But who's responsible for fixing it?
And that's the crucial part. The declaration also often outlines who is responsible for repairing or maintaining it. So, while the corporation might repair the structural concrete of the balcony, you, the unit owner, might be responsible for maintaining the floor surface or the railings. And that division of responsibility is a massive detail for a buyer to grasp.
Then you have the description. That sounds more like the technical blueprints and surveys.
It is. The description is a series of official plans and surveys showing the precise property boundaries, describing all the assets included, and providing detailed diagrams that show the exact shape and dimensions of each unit floor by floor. It gives you a precise legal picture of the physical structure you're buying.
Okay, moving beyond the physical structure, we get into how the place will actually be run. The bylaws and rules. What's the clear distinction between those two?
Bylaws cover the corporation's internal high-level operational procedures and financial governance. Things like how directors are elected, how common expenses are formally collected, how the corporation can borrow money. They're the corporate constitution, and they're harder to change than the rules.
And the rules are the daily behavior mandates.
Yes. Rules, on the other hand, are the regulations covering day-to-day living and the use of the shared space. These address things like visitor parking, whether short-term rentals like Airbnb are allowed, and often they are banned, and limits on the number and size of pets.
So if you're a dog owner, you better read the rules very carefully.
Very carefully, because they can often restrict you to, say, one dog under 25 pounds. That's a deal breaker for a lot of people.
I imagine the budget is the biggest source of anxiety for many pre-construction buyers. What essential financial information has to be in that disclosure statement?
The budget must include the detailed projected budget for the corporation's first year of operation, broken down expense by expense. It has to show the per-unit monthly common expenses, and crucially, the portion of those fees that will be allocated to the mandatory reserve fund for future major repairs.
And what about increases after that first year? That's what everyone worries about.
Right. It must also disclose any circumstance which might lead to an unexpected increase in common expenses after the first year, including the estimated amount of that potential increase. The idea is to ensure buyers aren't hit with a massive fee jump in year two.
And finally, the features section. This is all about managing expectations for the final product.
Exactly. This section lists all the materials and finishes, flooring, fixtures, countertops that will be installed in each unit. It also details the construction schedule for all the amenities, the gym, the pool, the party room, and clarifies which of those will be available during the often lengthy interim occupancy period.
Speaking of occupancy, let's address one of the most confusing and high-stress parts of buying a new condo: interim occupancy fees. You move in, you start paying, but you don't have title yet. What exactly are you paying for during that limbo period?
So this period starts when the builder declares the unit safe and ready for you to move in, and it ends months later when the condo corporation is formally registered and title is legally transferred. During this time, you are essentially a tenant to the builder.
A tenant in a home you've technically bought.
Right. And the monthly occupancy fee you pay is legally capped. It cannot exceed the total of three specific amounts.
Really?
First, the interest calculated monthly on the unpaid balance of the purchase price. Second, an amount reasonably estimated for the unit's monthly municipal property taxes. And third, the projected monthly common expense contribution for the unit.
Wait, I have to stop you there because this is where the surprise hits people the hardest. You are telling me that the buyer pays this full occupancy fee, interest, taxes, and condo fees, even if they choose not to move into the unit yet.
That is absolutely correct. The legal liability to pay starts the moment the unit is certified ready for occupancy, regardless of whether you take physical possession or not. If you can't sell your current home in time, or you just don't want to move yet, you are still paying all three of those charges every month until final closing.
That is a massive point of risk most buyers probably miss.
A huge one.
Now, let's imagine plans change. What happens if the builder changes the design or materials halfway through construction? What recourse does a buyer have for what's called a material change?
If there are material changes to the information in the original disclosure statement, the builder is legally obligated to provide a revised statement. And the Condominium Act defines a material change as a modification that a reasonable purchaser would deem important enough to back out of the agreement.
I need a clearer picture of that reasonable purchaser test. What makes a change material? If they just swap the brand of faucet, is that material?
Likely not. But if the builder promised granite countertops and then switches to a cheaper laminate across the board, that affects the perceived value and quality, that is very likely material.
Or if they promised a rooftop pool and then decide to scrap it.
Oh, that is definitely material. The Act is clear, however, that an increase of less than 10% to the projected common expenses is not considered a material change and doesn't automatically give you the right to cancel.
If a material change is properly notified, what's the buyer's immediate recourse?
If you're notified, you have the immediate right to cancel the agreement within 10 days of receiving that notice. You must receive a full refund of your entire deposit, plus any interest it's earned.
And if the builder doesn't disclose it?
Failure to disclose can expose them to compensation claims through the courts, so they have a very strong incentive to comply.
Now, let's talk about the dreaded delay and outright cancellation, which is probably the biggest anxiety for any pre-construction buyer.
Yes, and builders do have several options to cancel a project, which are usually built right into the agreement's conditions. This typically happens if they fail to pre-sell enough units, often a minimum threshold of 60 to 65% must be reached, or if they fail to secure financing or get the necessary approvals by a certain date.
So the buyer has to review those cancellation conditions really carefully.
Meticulously, because the decision rests entirely with the builder, not the buyer.
And the delays are legendary. Let's talk about the timeline. You have 3 different types of occupancy dates, each with very specific rules. Let's define them.
Right. The system is designed to give the builder some flexibility early on. First, you have the occupancy date. This is the initial anticipated move-in date. The builder can extend this multiple times without any penalty, as long as they give you at least 90 days notice of each extension.
Okay, so the initial date is soft, easily shifted.
Mm.
What happens when they miss that date and finally set the second date, the firm occupancy date?
The firm occupancy date is set if the initial date can't be met. The builder has to set this with 90 days notice, and this date is much less flexible. They can only extend the firm occupancy date one time, for a maximum of 120 days.
Only once.
Only once. That is the one mandatory extension allowance.
And the final deadline, the point of no return.
That's the outside occupancy date. This is the absolute latest guaranteed date the builder agrees to provide occupancy. If the unit completion is delayed beyond this date, you, the buyer, have the immediate right to terminate the purchase agreement. That's the last stop.
If these delays happen, if the firm date is missed or the outside date is missed, what financial compensation is mandated for the buyer, who's now paying for storage and temporary housing?
The buyer is entitled to compensation for delayed occupancy under the warranty rules, and that compensation is set at $150 per day. It's meant to cover living expenses like accommodations, meals, storage, extra moving fees, that kind of thing.
That $150 a day sounds helpful on paper, but if you're trying to house a family of 4 in a temporary rental, that money disappears pretty fast. What's the maximum compensation?
The maximum payment is capped at $7,500.
Wow, that's it.
That's the cap. And if the delay passes the outside occupancy date and you choose to terminate, you have to formally exercise that right within a 30-day window to get your full deposit back and any compensation you're owed. It's a critical safety net, but like you said, it's often not enough to cover months of serious disruption.
Okay, let's transition now from the complex, non-standard world of new construction to the much more established process of buying an existing or resale standard condo. These deals use a standardized agreement form, but they still have unique features that differentiate them from buying a house. Here, the headache isn't the builder, it's the corporation itself.
Absolutely. While the agreement form is standardized, the information you need to fill it out is highly specific to the condominium structure. You're buying into a shared legal entity, not just 4 walls.
So what unique identifiers have to be in the property description to make sure it's accurate, and how does a salesperson verify them?
The legal description requires several specific identifiers: the name of the corporation, the legal plan number, and the specific unit and level number, along with the building number if it's a multi-building complex. And it's the salesperson's duty to verify this information accurately.
How do they do that?
They'll use official documents like the seller's tax receipts, the previous deed, or access government online sources like GeoWarehouse to make sure the legal description is exact. A mistake here can completely derail a closing.
And a major point of confusion for buyers is always the add-ons. Parking and lockers. There's a critical distinction between those being owned versus being for exclusive use.
This is a vital distinction. It determines how flexible you are with the unit later. If the parking spaces and lockers are legally owned, they'll have a separate deed and their own legal description. Which means they can potentially be sold or rented out separately from the unit itself, often to another owner in the building. That adds real value.
And if they were exclusive use?
If they're designated for exclusive use, they just accompany the deed to the unit. You're the only person who can use them, but they are intrinsically tied to the unit and cannot be sold separately. They're just an extension of your unit's rights.
We also have the common expenses clause. This is the mandatory financial commitment that really defines the condo lifestyle.
Right. This clause notes the approximate monthly common expense fee, and it explicitly lists what those fees include. Is heat covered, water, electricity, common elements, insurance. These fees are paid by all the unit owners to maintain everything that isn't a unit.
And that's all verified later.
All verified via the status certificate. If a buyer assumes hydro is included but it isn't, their monthly carrying costs just jump dramatically.
That brings us to what you could argue is the single most important document in a resale transaction, the status certificate. For the audience, why is this mandatory, and how does it act as the ultimate protection for the buyer?
The status certificate is issued by the condominium corporation itself. It's a snapshot accurate as of the date it's issued, detailing the current legal and financial status of your specific unit and the overall health and management of the corporation.
And the deal should always be conditional on reviewing it.
Always. The agreement should be conditional on your lawyer receiving, reviewing, and approving the certificate. If the lawyer finds problems, you have the option to terminate the agreement.
Okay, so if I'm the buyer, what are the high-stakes things my lawyer is scrutinizing in that massive document? I don't just care about the rules on pets. I care about my wallet and my legal liability.
The lawyer focuses on key financial and legal risks. First and foremost, they check for no anticipated special assessments.
The dreaded special assessment.
Exactly. A special assessment is a sudden, large bill issued to all owners to cover an unexpected expense, like replacing the entire roof or fixing a major foundation issue. It can cost tens of thousands of dollars per unit. The status certificate has to confirm whether the board anticipates issuing one soon.
What else are they looking for?
Second, they look for confirmation of no pending legal actions by or against the corporation. If the condo corp is being sued over a major leak, the unit owners are liable for the costs of that lawsuit. Third, they check for no special meetings that have been called about terminating the corporation or any other substantial change. This protects you from walking into a massive, immediate capital decision.
And beyond the corporation's health, the certificate also tells us if the seller themselves is clean, right?
Yes, that's another key part. The certificate confirms if the seller is current on their common expense payments. If the seller is in arrears, say they owe 3 months of condo fees, that debt attaches to the unit, and you, the buyer, could potentially inherit it. The certificate protects you by confirming the unit's status is clean.
Beyond the status certificate, are there other unique resale clauses we need to highlight, particularly relating to what the buyer is forced to accept?
Yes, the clause on title acceptance is critical. You, the buyer, have to agree to accept the title with certain existing limitations. You have to accept rights and easements that are already registered against the title for necessary things like utilities, phone lines, gas lines, sewers running under the property.
So if there's a utility easement running along the back of the property that prevents me from building a garden shed there, I just have to accept that restriction.
You have to accept it, provided it was there and the seller was compliant. And furthermore, you have to accept any registered restrictive covenants that run with the land. If the rules say no exterior colors can be changed or that certain window coverings are banned, you accept that those rules now govern your ownership.
So even if I hate the rule banning satellite dishes, I have to accept it to buy the property.
That's correct. Another critical protection is the meetings clause. If the seller gets notice of a special meeting about, say, a huge alteration to the common elements before the closing date, they have to tell you in writing. If they do, you have the right to void the agreement and get a full refund.
It protects you from being blindsided by a major change just days before closing.
Exactly.
And finally, what about that rare but important clause about the approval of agreement?
Right. Although it's rare, some sales might be subject to the approval of the condominium corporation's board of directors. If board approval is required and it's not granted, the sales agreement is null and void, and the deposit has to be refunded. It's a key difference from a standard freehold sale where no third-party consent is needed.
Let's pivot to the Common Elements Condominium, the CEC. We defined the structure earlier. That unique dual nature of a freehold piece of land, the POTL, the house, combined with a separate shared interest in community infrastructure. How does that dual structure fundamentally change the agreement of purchase and sale?
It changes the agreement significantly, specifically in the property description and the financial adjustments, because the interest in the common elements, the shared roads, the park, the pool, is deemed shared and inseparable from the freehold property. The legal agreement has to feature a split property description to reflect that.
Walk us through how that's documented in the agreement. How can we tell what's freehold and what's shared?
The agreement has to contain two distinct descriptions. First, you have the description of the real property, or POTL. This is treated just like a standard freehold home description, with location info, frontage, depth, the legal lot description. This part has its own property tax bill and separate utility meters.
And the second part?
The second part is the description of the common elements. This section begins with the mandatory legal phrase, shall be deemed to include a common interest in, followed by the corporation's legal name and plan number. The agreement must explicitly state that the two parts are inseparable.
That legal split means the financial adjustments at closing are also different from a standard condo or a freehold house. You can't just prorate everything in the same way.
Correct. The adjustments follow standard freehold rules, but they apply only to the POTL portion. So that's your prorated costs for municipal property taxes, mortgage interest, rental fees for, say, a hot water tank, utilities, and fuel oil. Those are all separate costs because you own the house.
And the condo fees themselves.
The mandatory common expense fees only apply to the common elements portion, the shared facilities like the gate or road maintenance. So it's crucial to remember you'll be paying two sets of costs. Standard freehold maintenance costs for your house, plus the mandatory common element fee for the shared infrastructure.
When we were discussing resale standard condos, the status certificate was the ultimate source of truth about the corporation's health. How does that apply to a CEC, given that the POTL part is freehold?
This is a critical distinction for due diligence. The status certificate and all the associated condo documents, the declaration, rules, bylaws, they apply only to the common elements portion, the corporation that manages the shared infrastructure. They do not govern your individual house.
So you still need to review it.
Oh, yes. The buyer should still request a copy and have their lawyer review it, checking for the usual things, any anticipated special assessments for road repair, any pending lawsuits. But the certificate doesn't address the legal status of the house itself.
And when a lawyer is doing their due diligence, the title search has to be broader than normal because of that split.
Absolutely. A full title search has to be performed on both the parcel of tied land portion, the house and land, and the common elements portion of the corporation. For the POTL, you should get a standard home inspection. But inspecting the common elements, like having an engineer inspect a community center, that's usually possible, but likely too expensive for an individual buyer. They really have to rely on the status certificate for that part.
We've covered the 3 types of agreements. Now let's talk about actually executing the deal, starting with the strategy a salesperson uses before drafting the legal document, the offer plan. Before putting pen to paper on the legal form, what steps do they take to ensure accuracy?
The offer plan is essential. It's a foundational checklist to make sure every detail, clause, and term is accurate and complete before it's formalized. This reduces the risk of errors that can kill a deal. The sources outline 4 main steps.
What are they?
First, they summarize the offer mathematics: price, deposit, balance due. Second, they identify all the required dates: offer date, irrevocable date, requisition date, completion date. Third, they list the information for the schedule, all the conditions and the exact wording. And fourth, they identify any additional information needed, like chattels included, the fridge, the stove, or the exact common expenses.
And where do they gather and verify all this unique information, especially when dealing with a condo?
Verification is key. Information comes from multiple sources. You, the buyer, provide your legal name and terms. The local listing service provides the seller's preferences. And then crucial legal verification comes from external sources like GeoWarehouse, which confirms the seller's legal name, the property's legal description, and the current tax bills.
Let's use the sources example of Artie Shaw and Maya Wilson buying a resale condo for $625,000. Walk us through the offer mathematics and the specific dates they set up.
Okay, in that scenario, Artie and Maya set the offer price at $625,000. They proposed a substantial deposit of $30,000 to be paid upon acceptance, which shows good faith. This left a balance due on closing at $595,000.
And the dates.
The dates were set precisely. Offer date July 8, irrevocable until 9 p.m. that same night, meaning the seller has until 9 p.m. to accept or counter requisition date September 3 and completion date October 3.
And their included conditions were crucial to protect them, demanding due diligence on financing, inspection, and the condo docs.
That's right. They included 3 main conditions, each with a firm time limit. 1, satisfactory financing due within 5 business days. 2, satisfactory property inspection also within 5 business days. And 3, crucially for a condo, the lawyer's approval of the status certificate.
And how was that one worded?
That was due within 5 business days after the buyer receives the certificate, and the seller agrees to request that certificate within 2 days after acceptance.
5 business days is a tight deadline for a lawyer to review hundreds of pages of condo documents. Why is putting a tight deadline on a condition so critical to the deal?
Well, setting tight deadlines minimizes the time the property is off the market conditionally. If the buyer takes too long to fulfill or waive their conditions, the seller could lose out on other offers. The more definitive the deadlines, the smoother the transaction tends to proceed.
Now, once that offer is presented, the sellers might not like the price or the closing date. They might decide to make a counteroffer. What does that process look like legally?
A counteroffer is essentially a rejection of the original offer and the creation of a brand new one on slightly different terms. In the scenario, the sellers countered by adjusting the price to $640,000 and extending the irrevocable date by a day. The critical rule is that the sellers must initial all changes they make, every strikeout, every inserted number, and then sign and date the signature page.
So that creates a new legally binding offer.
Exactly.
Assuming the deal is accepted and the contract is binding, things can still change before closing. What are the 3 primary post-acceptance documents used to manage those conditions and changes?
First, we have the amendment. This is used when both parties mutually agree to change the legally binding contract after it's been accepted. This is common if, say, the buyer needs a longer closing date, or if an inspection reveals a major defect and the parties renegotiate the price to cover the repair cost.
But both sides have to agree.
Right. Neither party is obligated to agree to an amendment. It requires mutual consent.
Second is the notice of fulfillment.
The notice of fulfillment is issued by the buyer to inform the seller in writing that a condition has been met exactly as written. For instance, Artie and Maya got their bank approval for the mortgage on the terms they needed. Signing this document removes the condition and makes the offer firm and binding.
And finally, the waiver. How is that different from the notice of fulfillment, and when is it strategically used?
A waiver is an intentional relinquishment of a right by the party who benefits from the condition. It's used in situations where the condition relies on the buyer's sole and absolute discretion-like financing. If you're not entirely satisfied with the bank's terms, but you want the property anyway, you waive your right to use that condition to terminate. It removes the condition and makes the offer firm.
You're basically telling the seller, I had the right to walk away, but I'm giving up that right.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And we have to emphasize the difference here. With a true condition precedent, a buyer can waive their own financing condition, but they can't just waive certain external approvals.
Absolutely. A true condition precedent cannot be waived by either party because it depends on a third-party event outside their control. A classic example is requiring municipal zoning consent for a project. If that third-party consent fails, the agreement is null and void, and no amount of waiver from either party can save it.
We spent a lot of time defining the legal documents, but none of it matters if the client doesn't understand what they're signing. So Part 6 focuses on the salesperson's core duty, ensuring full comprehension. Since an accepted agreement is a legally binding contract, what is the primary overarching duty of the person guiding the client through it?
The primary duty is to promote and protect the best interest of their client. Because the contract establishes specific, high-consequence rights and obligations, the salesperson has to have solid, detailed knowledge of every single clause and condition and be able to explain them in clear, everyday terms.
What are the leading practices salespeople should follow during that review process? It sounds like you can't just skim it and hope for the best.
You absolutely cannot. The leading practices are strict. Review each clause in order, never skipping sections. They must define specialized terms like irrevocable, chattels, common expenses, and fixtures using analogies the client understands. And fundamentally, they must never assume knowledge, even if the client has bought 10 properties before. Contracts change, memories fade.
The ultimate test of comprehension isn't just listening, it's being able to articulate it back. How should a salesperson confirm that the legal language has actually landed with the client?
They should regularly check for understanding. A key technique is asking the client to explain the clause back to you, or restating the clause using different words or examples until the client articulates their rights correctly. For instance, asking, if you decide to walk away after fulfilling your financing condition, what happens? If the client says they lose their deposit, you know they get it.
What about language barriers?
That's a big one. If English isn't the client's first language, the salesperson is obligated to address this, potentially by insisting the client hires a qualified translator or involving a real estate lawyer or family member in the review.
Let's focus on those clauses that are notoriously challenging to explain, starting with the title search and the requisition date. What is the true high-stakes significance of this date that clients often miss?
The buyer's lawyer performs the title search to check for any issues, encumbrances, work orders, deficiency notices. The requisition date is the critical deadline by which the buyer's lawyer must formally demand corrections from the seller's lawyer.
So if the lawyer finds a massive unpaid work order from the city for a faulty furnace, they have to tell the seller to fix it by the requisition date.
Correct. But here's the huge consequence. If the buyer misses this deadline, they are deemed to have accepted the seller's title defects, and those problems become the buyer's responsibility after closing.
So if your lawyer misses that date, you just bought a property that might have a massive problem, and now fixing it is 100% your financial responsibility.
That is why this date is absolutely non-negotiable.
Wow. It sounds like accepting defects by default if you don't act fast enough. What are the general title clause implications, especially regarding those non-negotiable easements and restrictive covenants?
Well, the buyer is entitled to clear title, but they have to accept existing non-negotiable easements registered against the land for utilities. The salesperson has to explain how these might restrict the practical use of their property. For instance, you might have planned to install a massive deck, but a major sewer line running under the backyard protected by an easement might legally prevent that. You have to accept that.
And the same goes for restrictive covenants.
Likewise, yes. You have to accept any registered restrictive covenants, like a neighborhood rule restricting exterior paint colors, provided the seller was complying with them. If you plan to immediately violate one of those, You need to understand the risk of litigation from the condo corporation or your neighbors.
Finally, the documents and discharge clause, especially about mortgages. How do lawyers handle the discharge process, and what's the critical distinction between institutional and private lenders?
This clause assures the buyer that any existing mortgage on the property will be fully discharged by the seller. If the mortgage is held by a major financial institution, a big bank or credit union, the seller's lawyer can typically undertake to discharge it after closing. They use the closing funds to pay off the mortgage, and the bank promises to send the discharge papers later.
But the risk shifts dramatically if the seller has a private mortgage.
That is the critical distinction. If the mortgage is privately held, say, by an individual investor, the lawyer generally cannot accept that undertaking because the risk is too high that the private lender will fail to cooperate after closing. This means a privately held mortgage usually has to be fully discharged before the closing funds are released, which can complicate things.
And one final challenge,
Yeah.
the cost of adjustments.
Yes. These are prorated costs for taxes, utilities, and fuel that are calculated by the seller's lawyer and are often added to the final amount due. Buyers often overlook these unexpected expenses, which can add thousands of dollars in addition to the purchase price and down payment. Full comprehension of this is vital to avoid a cash shortfall at closing.
Okay, so to recap our deep dive into residential condominium agreements, we covered three distinct forms and their unique risks.
Yeah.
For new condominiums, the key takeaway is the non-standardized nature of the builder's agreement and the absolute necessity of using that protective 10-day cooling-off period.
For resale standard condominiums, the complexity shifts to the corporation. The single most important document is the status certificate, which has to be critically reviewed by a lawyer to check the financial health of the corporation and make sure no huge special assessments are on the horizon.
And for the common elements condominium, the legal structure is a dual one, a freehold parcel of tied land your house, with a deemed shared interest in the common elements, like the community infrastructure. Due diligence has to cover both pieces, and your costs are split between your individual property and the mandatory common element fees.
So what this all means for you is that while these agreements share standardized sections, the devil is truly in the details unique to that property type. Whether it's confirming the legal status of your parking spot, understanding who repairs your balcony, or checking if a utility easement prevents you from building that dream deck, expert guidance and focus review are absolutely non-negotiable.
And here is a provocative closing thought for you to consider, building on that high-risk element of new construction delays. We detailed that a builder can extend the initial occupancy date multiple times just by giving 90 days notice before they finally have to set a firm occupancy date. Given the long timelines of pre-construction, often 2, 3, even 5 years, imagine the true cost, not just financially but personally, of navigating multiple potential relocations, storage costs, and temporary accommodations while you wait.
The $7,500 maximum compensation for delayed occupancy is a ceiling. Does that maximum truly cover the immense emotional and practical disruption that multiple multi-month extensions can cause to your life? Or should buyers consider factoring in a higher personal risk premium before committing to a future that is so loosely tied to a timeline? Something to mull over as you review your next potential agreement.